Lesson, Tim Junkins.
Yay!
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everybody doing okay?
So far.
So far. Let's see how the rest of the day goes, right? Sorry, I've got too many moving parts here this morning. So, I have a lot of things I wanted to talk about today. And I was up late last night, conversing with a couple of different people, shooting ideas back and forth. Really trying to, because I had the meat of what I wanted to talk about down. And so I was up pretty late last night talking to a friend of mine, because I want to talk about Mother's Day, obviously. I want to talk about mothers. I thought that was a topical thing. It's something that's on our minds right now. And so it would make it would make a good topic for a Sunday morning. One of the things I came up with is, I came up with this great list. This is not personal experiences of mine, but I came up with these great 10 quotes about what my mother has taught me, and maybe this will resonate with you. My mother taught me time travel. If you don't straighten up, I'm going to knock you into the middle of next week. My mother taught me foresight. Make sure you wear clean underwear, in case you're in an accident. My mother taught me irony. Keep crying and I'll give you something to cry about. My mother taught me contortionism. Will you look at the dirt on the back of your neck? My mother taught me about weather. This room of yours looks like a tornado hit it. My mother taught me about envy. There are millions of less fortunate children in this world who don't have wonderful parents like you do. My mother taught me about anticipation. Just wait until we get home. My mother taught me about receiving. You are going to get it when we get home. My mother taught me humor. When the lawnmower cuts off your toes, don't come running to me. My mother taught me wisdom. When you get to be my age, you'll understand. Yeah, exactly. And so it's one of those things that when we look at the idea of who we are as parents, as mentors, as people who have influence on the next generation, we really look at what that actually means as people. I spoke to a friend of mine last night. We had a very lengthy conversation on Facebook talking about the idea of parenthood. Because today, and I'm going to apologize for this in advance, I really limbered up for today. We're going to be hitting a lot of scriptures today. A lot of different scriptures. Because we're going to be talking about a very brief chronological history on Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so, of course, that's going to cover 4 or 5 different pretty good passages. Before we get to that, I just want to show this one quote from my friend, because we talked about the idea of Mary as the steward of Jesus, as the person who was entrusted with, bringing him to term, giving birth to him into this world, and then in addition also taking care of him. And my friend came up with this quote that I thought was too good just not to share. Because we were talking about raising Jesus right and making sure he understood right and wrong. And so when he went out into the world to perform his ministry, he would be prepared to deal with such situations. And my friend says to me, well, I'm not even talking about moral stewardship. I'm also talking about the bedrock parenting stuff. Like making sure he didn't fall downstairs or eat rocks or whatever. I can't tell you how much parenting time is spent making sure kids don't fall downstairs. It's like a whole subsection of parenting. So my friend he's a new parent. He has a very young son at home and has already had one scare so far involving a broken arm. And so it's one of those things where he talked to me about the idea of just raising an infant child and how difficult that is, and something that I can't even begin to comprehend, but I'm sure many of you mothers in the room can. One of the unused sections today, I'll just pull one last quote from it, is that working mothers is actually a scientific study to prove that people don't need to sleep. That was part of another very long list, but that one in particular kind of stuck out. Last night, David and I went to a Youth for Christ fundraiser dinner over here in Montgomery County, and I heard some really amazing stories from some teenagers who, some were raised in good homes, some were raised in not such good homes, some had amazing parents, some did not have parental parents. I heard one really heart-aching story about how a boy in 7th grade had his second stepfather walk out on his family, and so there, in 7th grade, he had to become the man of the house. And he spent 2 hours each morning getting his younger siblings ready for school, and he himself would go to school late or not go to school at all. And through this, he became part of this program where he was able to be accepted and loved and find the love of Jesus. And so I realized that whether we are parents or just mentors to the children of the world, we develop a connection with those around us. We look at organizations like Youth for Christ, which is an amazing organization. The stories I heard last night were really just really got to me. And so we look at people like that, and we look at people like the parents who do the best job that they can, the parents who work as hard as they possibly can to provide a good life for us. One of the things I realized walking out of last night is I am exceptionally blessed as a human being. I am exceptionally blessed because not only do I have amazing parents, not only do I have brothers that I get along with, but I also have an extraordinary church family. I have an extraordinary circle of friends. And so it's one of those things where I realized last night how exceptionally blessed I am. So we're going to be opening up in Luke chapter 1 today is where we're going to be starting off. But really quick, I'm just going to touch very briefly on Ephesians 6, verse 1 through 2. You don't have to turn there. I'm just going to read it really quick. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land. The people who become parents, the people who become mothers, and they do the best job that they can, their reward for such action is that their children go off into the world and they form lives of their own. They grow up, they get jobs, they find families, they move on. They kind of continue the cycle of humanity, as it were. And so I am exceptionally proud, of my mother because of the excellent job she did raising not just myself, but my two brothers as well. And anybody who has had more than one boy in the house at any given time knows how chaotic that can be. And so looking Luke chapter 1, just looking into the verse 34, this is kind of the beginning, this is the starting point today. Where Mary is asking the question, how will this be? Mary asked the angel, since I am a virgin. She's inquiring about how she is going to give birth to Jesus. The angel answered, the Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she, who was said to be unable to conceive, is in her 6th month. For no word from God will ever fail. I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be fulfilled. Then the angel left her. This is the opening section where Mary finds out that she's going to become pregnant with Jesus. And the thing I find most interesting just about this first part, before we move on to the second part, is that she says, I am the Lord's servant, Mary answered. May your word to me be fulfilled. Then the angel left her. She was placed with this responsibility, and she accepted it. She outright accepted it. How many biblical historical figures can you name who they were, when you look at Moses, when you look at Jonah, when you look at people who, when God came to them and said, I want to give you the responsibility, they said no, and they tried to back out of it. But here's Mary at the forefront. Mary has accepted her responsibility. Flipping over to Luke 2. Like I said, we got to kind of limber up today, so. And so, this is Luke chapter 2. Oh boy, I did not mark the verses here. I believe it's 41 through 52. So they hurried off, and so this is after, this is post Jesus being married, or this is post Jesus being born by Mary. So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby, who was lying in the manger, where they had seen him. They spread When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told about this child, and all who heard were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. It's 16, sorry. I'm really sorry, guys. 41 must be the next section I'm looking at. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. There are multiple sections in the life of Jesus in which Mary is present, in which the phrase or the feeling of Mary pondering things is presented. That Mary is a thoughtful woman. She is a woman accepting of her responsibility. She is a woman that is willing to deal with this responsibility of not only raising Jesus, to make sure that he is raised right, to put him in the world, but then ultimately, and we'll get to that last part, to see the sacrifice that he has to make. There's very little I know about parenting. There's base concepts I understand. Things that my friends taught me. When he said that he has to make sure that his son doesn't eat rocks, I go, okay, that logic checks out. I'm not a parent, but that kind of makes sense. Make sure your kid doesn't eat rocks. I'm going to put that on the checklist if I ever become a parent. Don't eat rocks. But it's one of those things that I understand the bond as a child myself. I understand the bond between a son who is raised by loving parents and that bond that creates. To know and understand that what Mary is going to go through the course of her life is something that very few of us could actually handle. Luke chapter 2, 41 through 52. This is Jesus at the temple, yes?
Yes.
All right, excellent. I'm sorry, I copy and paste notes over to Word documents when I'm hammering them out. Every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Really quick sidebar here, people. This is a 4-day period where your son is missing. They traveled on for a day, so that's 1 day traveling back, then 3 days traveling around, frantically trying to locate him. Now, once again, not a parent, but I can understand there might be a certain level of panic in that situation. If your 12-year-old goes missing for 4 days in a crowded city, mind you. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. There's always a question of why isn't the adolescence of Jesus covered more? And the answer is because in this section here, you get the idea of what that dynamic was like. And so Jesus was, he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. He honored his father and mother. He went down with them and and more importantly, but his mother treasured all these things in her heart. Mary, once again, being thoughtful and contemplative, of understanding the responsibility. Because it's easy to forget the significance of who Jesus is in moments like these. Because in a moment like this, he's a 12-year-old separated from his parents. And so his parents find him, and they ask him what's going on, and they bring him back home, and he's obedient to them. But this is also Jesus, who was born from miraculous events, whose birth was announced by angels. And angels are not, as we perceive them in movies and TV shows, they're not just like kindly human-sized people. Angels are imposing figures. And so there's all these miraculous events surrounding the life of Jesus. And so, Mary is at the epicenter of this. She is raising him. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. You look at things like in the book of John. You look at the first miracle performed where Jesus changes water into wine. You look at things where his mother comes to him and says that they're out of wine. And Jesus asks her, why are you bringing this to me? It is not my time yet. And Jesus' mother simply turns to the servants and says, do whatever Jesus tells you to do. And then she leaves it alone. And Jesus performs, this miracle where he changes water into wine. And at the end of that, it says, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs to which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Mary is once again center at an event like that. She is there. And more importantly, Mary is the only person through the story of Jesus who is there from beginning to end. Joseph, the earthly father who raised him, dies at some point. The disciples had not come into the picture yet when he was 12 years old, but Mary was there. She was there from the beginning, and she's there at the end. Jumping down to the last part, John 19, 23 through 27. And this part was actually the genesis of this lesson. I was doing research on Mary as a person and the historical and the significant events that she was present for. And this one is the one that stuck out the most. So this is actually kind of the genesis of today's lesson. John 19, verses 23 through 27. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, they divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, Woman, here is your son. And to the disciple he said, Here is your mother. From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. This event is probably one of the most heartbreaking things in biblical history. Because it's one of those things that if you read words on the page and you don't take the gravity of it, if you don't really understand what it means. So what we've got is Jesus has already been crucified at this point. He is on the cross. There are nails through his hands. His clothes have been taken. They've been divided up by some kind of weird lottery just for the weird celebrity angle of it. And he is on it. And the thing that he makes sure to say is, Here is your mother. From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Jesus is on the cross with literally the weight of the world on his shoulders. He is dying for the sins of mankind so that you and I might be free, and he wants to make sure his mom is taken care of. He wants to make sure that after all this, his mom has a place to live. That his mom has purpose going from here on out. And so, from this very brief timeline that we have covered from the moment that Mary very willingly accepted the responsibility of giving birth to Jesus to having to watch her son die on the cross so that we can live without sin. And it's one of those things where Mary is truly an exceptional person. She is truly a person that is blessed. She is a person who is willing to accept the responsibility. Because if I come and I try to take your child from you so that the world can live without sin, are you going to let me? Come on, guys. It's for the good of humanity. It's so that the sins of the world can be forgiven. All you've got to do is give me your child. Volunteers? Hands? Nobody lining up. Nobody taking that opportunity. Nobody who's a little mad at their kid this week. No, of course not. And so Jesus, who had to live this extraordinary life, but lived this life as a mortal person, who had to die for the sins of humanity, on top of everything else, on top of the one thing that we don't think about, he had to have his mother present at his execution. And what does that mean for us? Well, one of the things I drew out of this is that I am not going to get into a Mother's Day competition with Jesus. That's the first thing I learned when doing this. I'm not going to look at the life of Jesus and the life he lived with his mother, and I'm not going to try and top that, because that's not going to happen. But what does it teach us? What do these moments teach us about our relationship with parents or the people that matter in our lives? Like I said, I've been exceptionally blessed to be raised by loving parents who have, stayed together, they have stuck it out, they have wrote out things, they have watched their children grow, they have let their children go into the world and make their own lives. I'm going to family lunch afterwards where there will be parents and children and grandchildren and dogs and all sorts of things. But we don't all get that. One of the things I learned about this program last night, this Youth for Christ program, is, and this high school girl phrased it extraordinarily well. She said that some kids are born with the deck stacked against them. And what we do is we rearrange the cards in their favor. And so, that simple analogy really spoke to me about what we do as people. What we do as people who, not just mothers, but fathers and mentors and aunts and uncles. And I was really thrilled to learn that there's an Aunts and Uncles Day in July. Because I thought I was missing out. But today I wanted to focus on Mary. I wanted to focus on her relationship. Because if you actually read beyond the Gospels, if you read just a little bit into Acts, it actually mentions her by name as being present at a meeting. It says Mary, the mother of Jesus, was present. And so, after Jesus dies for the sins of humanity, after he raises from the dead, after he ascends, her life continues on. Where she lives in a house and she is loved and she lives and she continues to be involved in the lives of the disciples. And her history from there kind of trails off and fades into the background. And I was talking about, I had to go by my parents' house this morning. My mother brought up a really good point where she said that, when you're a mother, you do your best to raise your kids and you let them go off into the world and then you kind of fade into the background yourself. And so it's one of those things where, like she says every now and again an athlete will run across camera and say, "Hi, Mom," or somebody accepting the Academy Award will say, "I'd like to thank my mom." But the mothers kind of get pushed to the background a little bit sometimes. But at the end of the day, isn't that what legacy is about? Isn't it about raising people up and sending them off into the world and watching them do a good job and being proud of them? The greatest gift of all, though, out of all this, is that Jesus still went through this for us. That's truly the greatest thing that we can take away from this, is that his sacrifice, the way he was raised, the environment he was raised in, the people he surrounded himself with, despite the fact that he was rejected by the world, despite the fact that people didn't necessarily believe who he was, despite the fact that there was only one account of people at the foot of the cross, because so many people were too scared to be seen with Jesus. So many people were scared. They thought things were going sideways. They thought this whole operation was going up in flames. And so a lot of people had distanced themselves. And there, at the foot of the cross, is Mary, the mother of Jesus. And it's something that I think adds a certain amount of density to hymns like he could have called 10,000 angels. Because you're up on the cross and you're dying for the sins of humanity, and there is your mother at the foot of the cross and she is weeping for you. And more than anything else, in those moments, that's where my weakness would shine the most. That's where I would call 10,000 angels. That's where I would set myself free, if nothing else, to spare my mother the pain of watching that. And so that is why the responsibility of dying for the sins of humanity does not fall to me as an individual, does not fall to us as a congregation, and does not fall to us as a people. That responsibility is reserved solely for Jesus Christ. And that is why we believe in him. That is why we follow him. That is why we honor him. It is those reasons that knowing that he went through with it, that he made the ultimate sacrifice for us, that is the thing that resonates with me strongest. And so what must have that been like to go through? To know that he could have stopped it, to know that he could have gotten out of it, to know that he could have gotten away with it, but didn't, so that we might be free. That is the ultimate sacrifice that will ever be made for us as a people. And so if you're here today, if you have received this message, if you have heard these words, if they have resonated with you in some way, if you need special prayers, if you need to give yourself over to Jesus, over to the power that is so strong that he would die for the sins of the world. He would die for the generation then, he would die for future generations. If you're here today and you have heard that message and want to receive it, I ask you to do that as we stand and sing the song of invitation.
I have resolved no